They told me to sit, to stay quiet, to just enjoy the cake and keep my thoughts to myself. But silence was never what your father wanted from me. Not on this day, not ever. My name is Dorothy Whitfield, and I turned 73 this spring. I've lived long enough to know that people remember you in two ways: by the words you spoke, or by the words you left unsaid. For years, I let my family's voices fill the room while mine was pushed aside, dismissed as if it no longer mattered. But on this birthday, with all of them gathered under my roof, I carried something heavier than cake or candles. I carried my husband's words, the last he had ever written to them. It started the way birthdays usually do in my house. My eldest son, Robert, arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine under his arm as though it were an offering. His wife, Marlene, trailed behind, her lips pursed in that polite smile she wore like a mask. Their two children darted inside without so much as a hello, glued to their phones. Then came my daughter Linda with her husband, always the peacemakers, always trying to smooth things over. She hugged me longer than the others, as if she sensed the weight I was carrying in my chest. Finally, my youngest, David, swept in with his fiancée, Vanessa. Vanessa, bold and brash, announced herself with a laugh that seemed too loud for the room. She was the one who quickly said, "No speeches tonight, Mum. We just want cake and pictures, nothing heavy." The others nodded along, and suddenly I was being ushered toward my own chair at the corner of the table, like a guest at someone else's celebration. I smiled politely, but inside, it stung. Do they really think I've run out of things worth saying? That my only role is to sit quietly, cut the cake, and fade into the background? As the evening went on, I listened more than I spoke. Robert dominated the conversation, as he always did, talking about his latest business deal, the new car he had leased, how important he was becoming. Marlene nodded, adding little jabs about how old-fashioned my home looked, suggesting I should modernize. She said it lightly, but I caught the way her eyes scanned the worn furniture Richard and I had saved for, every piece chosen with care. David, in contrast, barely looked at me. He laughed loudly at Vanessa's jokes, some of them at my expense. "She still uses checks," Vanessa said, chuckling. "Can you imagine?" The table erupted with laughter, and I smiled faintly, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat. It wasn't that I couldn't take a joke, but there was something different about the way they spoke, like I was no longer a person to respect, only a prop to amuse them. Linda, bless her, tried to steer things back. She asked me if I wanted to say a few words before dessert, but Robert cut in quickly. "No, Mum. We know you love speeches, but let's just keep it light this year. We've all had a long week." That's when I realized it. They didn't just want me quiet for the evening. They wanted me small, easy, invisible. I excused myself to the kitchen to fetch the cake. As I lit the candles, my hands trembled, not from age, but from the storm gathering inside me. In the drawer beside the matches sat the envelope, cream-colored, sealed, with my husband's handwriting still clear after all these years. For the children, when the time is right. Richard had given it to me 2 months before his passing. I remembered his words that night, his hand resting over mine. "Dorothy, if they ever forget who they are, if they ever forget you, give them this. It'll remind them of what matters." For 2 years I had guarded it, unsure if the right time would ever come. But tonight, as I heard my children laugh at me, dismiss me, silence me, tonight, the time felt painfully clear. When I returned to the table, they were already cutting into the conversation again, barely noticing me as I placed the cake down. "Make a wish, Mom," they chimed, not even pausing long enough to hear if I had one. And in that moment, as the candles flickered and everyone leaned forward with their phones out, waiting for the perfect picture, I made my decision. I would not sit, I would not stay quiet, and I would not let Richard's letter remain sealed any longer. As I watched the candles flicker and the camera flashes light up the room, my mind slipped away from the present noise and drifted back to quieter days. To Richard Whitfield, my husband of 51 years, a man who never raised his voice unless it was to laugh, who believed that every person deserved to be seen, especially when the world tried to make them invisible. He was the steady oak in my life, the one who kept this house upright, not just with his hands, but with his heart. We met at a church social when I was barely 21, awkward and shy, holding a cup of punch like it was a shield. He walked straight up to me, grinned, and said, "You look like you have something important to say. Mind if I listen?" That was Richard, always listening, always giving space to voices the rest of the world tried to quiet. When the children were young, he worked 2 jobs so I could stay home with them. He never complained, not once. At night, after the house fell quiet, he would sit at the kitchen table and scribble letters, little notes tucked into lunchboxes, birthday cards filled with more words than most men would write in a year, anniversary letters that reminded me that love, real love, grows richer with time. And when he grew sick, when the strength drained from him, but not the light in his eyes, he wrote even more. It was as if he knew his words would need to outlive him. 2 months before he passed, he called me into the bedroom. The children had left after a visit, their laughter still echoing faintly down the hall. He was propped up with pillows, his breath short, but his smile steady. He patted the side of the bed. I sat, holding his hand. Still warm, still strong enough to squeeze mine. That's when he slipped the envelope into my palm. Cream-coloured, sealed tight, with my name on the front in his bold handwriting. "Dorothy," he said, his voice rough but certain. "This isn't for you. This is for them. For when the time is right." I tried to protest. "Richard, you can tell them yourself. There's still time." But he shook his head gently. "No, love. You know them. You know how easily they forget the things that matter when they're too busy chasing the things that don't. One day they'll need reminding. And when that day comes, you'll know." I asked him what the letter said. He only smiled, his eyes twinkling in that way they always did when he kept a surprise. "If I told you, you'd carry the burden before you had to. Trust me, Dorothy. Just hold on to it." That night, after he fell asleep, I sat in the chair by his bedside, clutching the envelope. I remember staring at it for hours, wondering what truths it held, what words he had chosen. But I never opened it. Some part of me felt it would dishonor his trust. After he passed, the house felt unbearably silent. Every corner reminded me of him, the worn armchair, the garden he loved, the whistle of the kettle he used to make tea every morning. And that envelope, tucked away in the drawer, became both my comfort and my torment. There were nights when I wanted to tear it open, desperate to feel his voice again. But I waited. I kept waiting for the moment he had spoken of, the moment when the family would need his words more than I did. And tonight, as they laughed at me, silenced me, treated me like a piece of old furniture, tonight I finally understood. This wasn't just my birthday. It was the day Richard's voice would return to this house. When I looked back across the table, I could almost see him sitting there, smiling quietly, waiting for me to do what he asked. The letter was more than paper. It was a promise, a torch passed from his hands to mine, and I would not let it burn unseen any longer. The candles were blown out, the cake sliced, and yet, instead of warmth filling the room, there was a heaviness pressing down on me. I could feel it in the way my eldest son, Robert, commandeered the conversation, his voice loud, his stories longer than anyone cared to hear. But no one dared interrupt. "Closed another deal last week," he boasted, leaning back in his chair, patting his stomach like a king satisfied with his feast. That client was tough, but I showed him who knew better. Marlene, his wife, added with that tight smile of hers, "We really are lucky, aren't we, Robert? Not everyone has the head for success." Her eyes flicked across the table toward David, the youngest, in that subtle but sharp way she had of slicing others down without raising her voice. David, of course, didn't notice. He was too busy laughing at something Vanessa had said. She had one manicured hand on his arm, the other waving dramatically as she recounted a story about a friend's vacation. "They flew first class the whole way. Can you imagine? That's how we'll travel someday, David. No cramped seats for us." She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, her laughter ringing in my ears. Linda tried to bring the focus back to me, bless her. "Mom, why don't you tell the grandkids about the time Dad planted that apple tree in the backyard? They'd love that story." But Robert cut her off before I could even open my mouth. "Linda, let's not bore them with old stories tonight. Mum's told those 100 times." He looked at me with a patronizing grin. "No offense, Mom, but we just want to relax tonight." The table chuckled politely, and just like that, my voice was shoved back down my throat. I looked at my grandchildren, their faces lit by their phone screens. They barely noticed me sitting there. To them, I was just Grandma, someone who sat quietly in the corner while the grown-ups talked. It wasn't just the words that stung. It was the way they dismissed me without thought, as if I had nothing left to offer, as if my years of sacrifice, staying up late when fevers ran high, pinching pennies so they could go to school trips, standing shoulder to shoulder with Richard to keep this family afloat, had all evaporated into nothing. Vanessa leaned forward then, her voice loud and clear. "Really, Dorothy, just enjoy the evening. We don't need speeches or stories. It's your birthday. You should relax." Relax. As though being silenced were a gift. I felt my throat tighten. My hands gripped the edge of my chair. For years, I had been the anchor of this family, the steady one. And now, they wanted me small, quiet, invisible. But Richard's words came back to me, clear as if he were sitting beside me. "If they ever forget you, Dorothy, give them this." I reached beneath the table, my fingers brushing against the envelope in my pocket. It was heavier than paper had a right to be. It carried the weight of his voice, his judgment, his love. Linda must have sensed something in my face because she asked gently, "Mum, are you all right?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, dear." But inside, I wasn't fine. Inside, a fire was building. The chatter continued, but I barely heard it. I was watching my children, each of them so sure of themselves, so blind to how far they'd drifted from the man who raised them. Robert, smug and proud. David, careless and distracted. Vanessa, hungry for appearances. And even Linda, though kind, too timid to stand against her siblings. This was the moment Richard had spoken of. I felt it in my bones. The time was right. As I sat there, hands trembling just slightly in my lap, I made a quiet vow to myself. I would not leave this table without Richard's voice being heard, and whether they wanted to or not, my family was about to remember who he was, and who I still was. I don't know how long I sat there, my fork untouched on the plate, their voices washing over me like distant static. My eyes stayed fixed on the cake, on the small glow of melted wax that still lingered where the candles had been. I remembered every birthday Richard had ever given me. He always stood beside me, his hand at the small of my back, urging me forward. "Say something, Dorothy," he'd whisper with that half-smile of his. "The world needs to hear you." But now it was his voice I carried in an envelope, hidden in my pocket, and the world I needed to face was my own family. The chatter grew louder. Robert pontificating, Vanessa laughing, Marlene making little jabs, Linda's voice drowned out. It felt like the walls of the dining room were closing in. And then, without thinking, I pushed my chair back and rose to my feet. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor silenced them faster than a shout could have. Every head turned. Forks paused mid-air. "Mum?" Robert's voice carried that sharp edge of annoyance. "What are you doing? You don't need to stand. Sit. We're about to start presents. I want to say a few words." My voice shook at first, but I steadied it, feeling Richard's strength flow through me. Vanessa groaned dramatically, tossing her napkin down. "Dorothy, please, it's your birthday. Let's not make this heavy. We said no speeches." Marlene chimed in with her usual false sweetness. "Yes, dear. Just relax. You deserve to enjoy yourself, not fuss with long talks." I looked at them all. My children, their spouses, my grandchildren with their glowing screens. I saw impatience on their faces, even irritation. But not respect. Not the respect their father taught them to give. And suddenly, I felt the tremor in my hands, still. My back straightened. The years of swallowing words, of staying quiet to keep the peace, fell away. "This isn't my speech," I said firmly. "These are your father's words." The room froze. For a moment, all I heard was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Robert's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Dad's words?" "He's gone." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. The cream paper had softened over the years, edges worn from where my fingers had traced them in secret. I held it up so they could all see. "He left this for you," I said softly. "For all of you. He told me to wait until the time was right. And tonight? I know it is." Linda's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes already filling with tears. David sat straighter, curiosity flickering across his face. But Robert leaned back in his chair, his lips pressing into a thin, skeptical line. "Mum," he said slowly, "you've been sitting on some letter this whole time, and you just decide now, on your birthday, to pull this out? Why?" "Because," I answered, my voice rising with a strength I hadn't felt in years, "I've sat here tonight, listening to you laugh at me, dismiss me, silence me. And I realized, if I let his voice go unheard, if I let his words die in this envelope, then I've betrayed him. I will not do that. Not tonight." A hush fell over the table. Even Vanessa, who always had something sharp to say, stayed quiet. The grandchildren put down their phones, sensing the weight in the air. With careful fingers, I broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper echoed louder than it should have. I unfolded the letter, my hands trembling again. But this time, not with fear. I looked down at Richard's handwriting, bold and steady, the same way it had always been. "Your father wrote this for you," I said, my voice catching. "And tonight, you're going to hear it." I cleared my throat and began to read. My eyes lingered on his handwriting for a moment. Even after all these years, the sight of it brought a lump to my throat. It was strong, deliberate, just like him. I swallowed and began. "My dear children, if you are hearing these words, it means I am no longer with you. I don't know when your mother chose to read this. She knows best. But I do know she would never do it unless the moment truly called for it. First, let me tell you what every father should say, but too few do. I am proud of each of you. Proud not because you are perfect, but because you are mine. I've watched you stumble, fall, and get back up again. I've watched you grow from children chasing fireflies in the yard to adults carrying the weight of the world. No matter what, you will always be my children, and I will always be your father." I paused, the words trembling in my throat. The room was utterly silent. Even Robert, whose face often carried nothing but impatience, was leaning slightly forward. I continued. "To Robert, my eldest, you've always been ambitious, always reaching higher. I admired that in you. I knew from the time you were small, setting up lemonade stands and charging more than the other kids, that you would chase success with everything in you. But remember, son, Success without humility is an empty trophy. If you forget to look back and lift others as you climb, you'll find yourself alone at the top. To Linda, my peacemaker, you were born with a soft heart, and in a family that sometimes shouted louder than it listened. You were the quiet thread holding us together. Don't lose that. But don't let it be your prison either. Peacekeeping is noble, but sometimes peace requires speaking the hard truth. I glanced at Linda then. Her cheeks were wet with tears. She gave the faintest nod, as if her father's words reached straight into her chest. To David, my youngest, you always had laughter in your bones. You reminded me not to take life so seriously, and for that I thank you. But hear me, a man who only laughs, who hides behind jokes and distractions, risks becoming a stranger to himself. Find your anchor, find your purpose, and don't let anyone, especially yourself, convince you that drifting is enough. David shifted uncomfortably, his fiancée's hand slipping from his arm. He looked down at his plate, no trace of laughter left in him. I steadied my voice and went on. And to my grandchildren, whether you are listening closely now or not, know this: your heritage is more than a last name or a house to gather in. It is the respect you show to those who came before you, the gratitude you carry for the sacrifices made long before you were born. Someday you'll stand where your parents sit now, and you'll be measured by the way you honor those who raised you. Don't forget that. I stopped, looking around the table. The grandchildren were no longer lost in their phones. Their faces were pale, caught between shame and curiosity. I drew in a long breath before continuing. Finally, to your mother, I leave these words for you all to hear, because she will never say them herself. Your mother is the strongest person I have ever known. She carried this family through storms I could not have weathered alone. If you ever fail to honor her, to listen to her, to respect her, then you fail me, for she is, and always will be, the heart of this family. My voice cracked. For a moment, I couldn't go on. The words blurred on the page as my eyes filled. I felt his presence so vividly, as though he were standing just behind me, steadying me the way he always had. Across the table, I saw Linda openly weeping now. Even Robert's jaw had tightened, his bravado cracking just slightly. But I knew this was only the beginning, because Richard's letter didn't end with love and gratitude. It went deeper, sharper, truthful in ways I wasn't sure they were ready to hear. I folded the page halfway, took a trembling breath, and said, "There's more, and you need to hear it." I tightened my grip on the letter. The first part had been his hand on their shoulders, gentle, steady. But this next part, this was Richard at his most unflinching, the man who believed in truth, even when it stung. I cleared my throat and read on. My children, I have praised you. Now I must be honest with you, because love without honesty is no love at all. Robert, my son, your ambition is fire, but fire can destroy as quickly as it warms. I've watched you turn that ambition into pride, into arrogance. You dismiss your siblings, you belittle your mother, you measure worth by wealth. Son, if you do not learn humility, your victories will taste like ash. Remember this: a man who cannot kneel before his family is no man at all. Robert shifted uncomfortably. His face flushed red, though he tried to mask it with a scoff. But no words came. For once, he was silent. Linda, my sweet girl, you carry everyone's burdens, but in doing so, you risk being crushed beneath them. You excuse behavior that should never be excused. You remain quiet when your voice should ring out. I fear that in always trying to keep the peace, you'll lose the strength to stand for yourself. Hear me. Gentleness without courage will leave you hollow. You are stronger than you think. Use it. Linda sobbed openly now. Her husband reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, as if affirming the truth of her father's words. David, my youngest, you have charm, wit, and light. But you've chosen the easy path too many times. I saw it in your school years. I see it in your work now. You skate by, laughing off responsibility. But laughter cannot pay debts. Jokes cannot build a life. If you continue this way, you'll reach middle age with nothing but regret. Do better, son. Not because I want it, but because you need it. David's face hardened, his eyes flicking toward Vanessa as if to find defense there. But she looked away, her painted smile fading. I swallowed, my voice tightening as I reached the heart of Richard's letter. And now I must speak of legacy. You may think of it as money, as houses, as things. But legacy is not divided by lawyers or banks. It is carried in your actions. Still, I know the world will ask about inheritance. I have made choices you may not like. I chose not to divide everything equally. Equality and fairness are not the same thing. Fairness considers love, respect, and responsibility. Gasps echoed around the table. I heard Marlene mutter under her breath. Unbelievable. Robert's fists clenched against the tablecloth. I steadied my breath and went on. To those who honoured your mother, you will find honour in what I left. To those who dismissed her, who treated her as though her years of sacrifice were worth less than your own ambitions, you will find nothing. Because a man's estate belongs first to the woman who built it with him, and to the children who never forgot where it came from. The room erupted. Robert's voice boomed first. So what? You're saying he cut me out? He wouldn't do that. Mom, this is manipulation. You picked the time, the place. Quiet, Robert, I said sharply, surprising even myself. These are his words, not mine. David blurted out, This is insane. Dad would never punish us like this. But his eyes betrayed doubt. Linda simply wept, her tears quiet, her head bowed. She knew, perhaps better than the others, that every word was true. I pressed on, determined to finish. My greatest hope is not that you fight over what I left, but that you remember who you are. A family without respect is no family at all. Honour your mother. Honour each other. If you cannot, then all I worked for, all I sacrificed, will mean nothing. I folded the letter slowly, the paper trembling between my fingers. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of Richard's words hung heavy in the air. And then, with the letter resting in my lap, I whispered, He wanted you to hear this. Not next year. Not someday. Tonight. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint ticking of the old clock on the mantel, each second stretching longer than the last. My hands rested on the folded letter in my lap, but my heart was pounding hard enough to echo in my ears. Then, like a dam bursting, the voices came all at once. Robert slammed his palm against the table, rattling the plates and glasses. This is ridiculous. Convenient, isn't it? That Dad can't defend himself, and you're the one holding the letter? How do we even know this is real? His face was red, his jaw tight. You've been sitting on this for 2 years, Mum. 2 years. And now you decide to drop it on us? Robert! Linda's voice cracked, tears still streaking her cheeks. Don't you dare accuse her of lying. You heard those words. You know they were his. But Robert was already leaning forward, his eyes burning. No, I don't know that. For all we know, Mum wrote that herself. Marlene touched his arm, whispering sharply, Don't say that. But her eyes darted toward me, uncertain. I felt my spine stiffen. Your father gave me this envelope himself. I didn't change a word. I didn't need to. He knew you, Robert. He saw you for who you are, and he hoped you'd listen before it was too late. Robert opened his mouth, but no words came. He leaned back, seething, his fists clenching and unclenching against the table. David spoke next, his tone bitter but shaky. So that's it then? Dad decided who's worthy and who's not. Based on what, Mom? Some idea of respect? What about everything I've done? What about everything Robert's done? Everything you've done, I repeated, my voice sharp now. David, you barely call. You breeze in with your laughter and leave just as quickly. Do you think your father didn't notice? Do you think I haven't noticed? His face paled. He glanced toward Vanessa for support, but she looked away, fiddling with her napkin, her cheeks pink with embarrassment. Linda, still crying softly, reached for my hand. Mum, thank you. For reading it. For saving it. He was right. You've always been the heart of this family. Her words cut through the chaos like a balm, but Robert scoffed. Oh, of course. You'd say that, Linda. The golden child. The one who plays saint. Linda's tears turned into anger. Don't you dare call me that. Do you have any idea how many times I've kept the peace between you and David? Do you know how many times I've bitten my tongue to avoid tearing this family apart? Dad was right. You treat everyone like they're beneath you. The room erupted again. Voices clashing, accusations flying. The grandchildren sat frozen, their wide eyes darting from face to face, as if seeing their parents for the first time. I rose to my feet once more, my voice cutting through the noise. Enough! The room fell silent. Even Robert stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. I placed the letter on the table, my hand steady. These are your father's words. If you choose to ignore them, that is your burden to carry. But don't you dare question his love for you. He wrote this because he loved you enough to be honest, and because he loved me enough to make sure my voice was heard when you tried to silence it. I turned my eyes on Robert. You think I wanted to read this tonight? That this gave me pleasure? Number. But I will not sit quietly while you dismiss me. Not any more. I looked at David. You laughed to cover your fear, but your father saw you. He believed you could be more. Don't waste that chance. And finally, I looked at Linda, my voice softening. You are stronger than you know. Don't let their noise silence you, not anymore. For the first time that evening, the room was quiet, not just from shock, but from reflection. Robert's face was still tight, his pride refusing to bend. David sat slumped, his expression caught between guilt and anger. Linda wept quietly, but her eyes were fierce, shining with something new. And I felt Richard's presence beside me. For the first time since his passing, I felt as though I had fulfilled something he asked of me. I took my seat again, my hands no longer trembling. You can be angry at me, I said softly, but you will not silence me. Not tonight. Not ever again. The room remained quiet after my words, but it wasn't the quiet they wanted from me earlier that night. It wasn't dismissal, or boredom, or polite silencing. This quiet was heavy, filled with the weight of truth settling into each of their chests. I sat back down slowly, placing the folded letter on the table between us. It looked small, just a single sheet of paper, but the weight of it had shifted everything. Robert stared at it as if it were an enemy, his jaw clenched and unclenched, his pride battling with something deeper. For once, he had no story to tell, no clever remark, no way to laugh it off. David leaned back in his chair, his usual grin gone. His eyes darted anywhere but at me, or the letter. Perhaps he was replaying his father's words, realizing they cut closer to the truth than he'd ever wanted to admit. Linda's hand was still on mine, warm and trembling. She whispered, almost too softly for anyone else to hear, "Thank you, Mom. I needed this." We all did. Her eyes shone, not with weakness, but with a strength I hadn't seen in her before. Richard had been right. She carried the gentleness of peace, but also the courage to grow sharper when needed. And the grandchildren? They sat still, their phones forgotten. I wondered what they thought, whether they truly understood, or if they would only understand years from now, when their parents' voices echoed in their own children. Still, they had looked up from their screens for the first time that evening. That, in itself, was something. I leaned back and took a deep breath. The heaviness inside me, the silence I'd swallowed for years, felt lighter now. Richard's voice had filled the room again, and through him, mine had too. I thought of him, of the night he handed me this envelope, his hand warm and sure. He had trusted me to know when the time was right. I'd doubted myself, worried I'd never find the courage. But tonight proved that I could, that I had. "Your father loved you," I said at last, my voice softer now. "Every word I read tonight came from love. If you're angry, be angry at the truth, not at me. But don't forget him, and don't forget what he asked of you." No one replied, but in their silence I sensed the shift. Small, maybe fragile, but real. When the evening wound down, it was Linda who helped me clear the plates. Robert left in a huff, Marlene trailing behind him, her face a mask of strained composure. David shuffled out quietly, Vanessa tugging at his arm, her laugh sounding forced and hollow. Only Linda lingered, pressing a kiss to my cheek before leaving. When the door closed and the house fell silent again, I sat alone at the table. The letter lay before me, no longer hidden, no longer a secret. I traced Richard's handwriting with my fingers one last time and whispered, "I did it, love. They heard you." For the first time in years, I felt peace wash over me. They had told me to sit, to stay quiet, to just fade into the background. But I stood anyway. I spoke. And I let Richard's voice and mine fill the room one final time. Whether they liked it or not, they would remember.